Can you think of a story where you have taken matters into your own hands? And when you did, it did not turn out the way that you thought it would, right? Maybe you were even given great advice, like maybe not to do something. And you're like, no, that's really dumb. I'm gonna do my own thing, and it's gonna be awesome. And then when it's not awesome, it's like, maybe I shouldn't have done that thing. Maybe what's even more fun is like when you ask maybe your parents, your friends, your family, like, can you think of a time when, if you're like, I can't think of a time because I'm just so great, maybe ask them and they maybe will give an example of that when you actually did do that. So I could probably think of a lot of modern things that I have done even recently, but I thought, why not hearken back to the good old days, right? When I got some students in the room. This is probably the summer of 94, 95. I was probably 14, 15 years old. And at this time, you could actually buy fireworks in convenience stores. And like, why not buy fireworks when they're like readily available? And so like me and my buddies would constantly kind of use our change to buy Crazy Jacks, right? That's what those were called. Or we could buy like Black Cats, but we actually didn't want to blow off fingers. And so Crazy Jacks were the ones that you light and you just chuck them at your friends or at other things. And you just have no idea actually where they're going to go. Now, my parents had said, hey, that's fine, go ahead and do that. But maybe I thought it was just a suggestion, but their instructions were, I don't mind you lighting them, just don't do it out front, right? Because we lived like right off the main drag of our little town. And they're like, so just go out back if you're gonna just chuck fireworks everywhere. Now, before I tell you the story, this is a summer where it has been so hot and no rain. And so we're out, like, do I heed my parents' instruction? No, it's a suggestion. And so we are just throwing them at each other out front. And they see us, because parents see all, and they know all. And they come out and they say some great words. They were encouraging me to get on back. And so then we go back and we're still lighting them, throwing them. And lo and behold, as I'm looking to the front, though, I see this glow. And this glow is not just a little glow. This is actually a massive orange glow that is coming out of this ginormous tree. And lo and behold, we have set this tree on fire. Now, not only is this a big tree, but this is a big tree in front of this little old lady's house. And it is on fire. And let's just say, like, this, I'll keep a long story short here. This thing got out of control really quickly. Like, my friends I thought, well, we don't need to have anybody's help. We can actually just put this out ourselves. And so we grab, like, I turned on the spigot, and it's like one of those things, where you wind up the hose. Like, my friend just took that thing and just went off on a sprint, and he ripped that hose from the spigot. So we can't even now put it out. And within minutes, we're just kind of looking at each other. I have no idea what to do. Fire trucks and police officers are zipping around the corner. Lies were told. Like, I don't know how this thing started. And so here's the thing. Like, we oftentimes will take matters into our own hands, and when we do, it does not bode well for us. We're not as wise as we think we are. We're just not. And so what we're going to see today is that David is going to take matters into his own hands, and he is not as wise as he thinks he is. And so I want you to journey over, if you have your Bibles, to 1 Samuel 27. As we start this new series, Rise and Fall, some of you are like, this isn't a new series. It is a new series. Like, we've branded it a little bit differently. Back in May last year, we started 1 Samuel. We called it Plot Twist. And so for the first, we kind of stopped and went into another series. Remember, in 1 Samuel, what you see over and over is that God is going to take the people that are like in high positions, and typically these are not good guys. These are bad guys. And he's going to take them from their high positions, and he's going to bring them low. Remember what I called it? It's called a chiasm. It's a grammatical structure. It's a Wakanda forever. It's like an X. And God will take those who are high, like in a high position, and he will bring them low. He will humiliate them because of their wickedness. And he'll take those who are lowly and humble, and he will exalt them in due time. That's what you see at the very beginning of 1 Samuel, right? You saw it with Hannah and Peninnah, right? Peninnah is the one who was able to have kids, and she was mocking Hannah. But by the end of the story, right, Hannah, who's lowly and barren, is now having kids, and Peninnah is brought low. You saw it with Eli and the priesthood, right? They're in their high positions over all of Israel. God is going to humiliate them and bring them low. And he's going to take this lowly little boy named Samuel, and he's going to elevate him. And Samuel is going to become the prophet of God. He is going to become really the judge over Israel. He is really the nation's priest. He is prophet, king, and judge. And you saw it with Dagon and God, right? Dagon looks mighty and victorious, like the ark was captured. And yet he was humiliated. He falls before the ark in his own temple. And so you saw the kind of the humiliation of Dagon and the elevation of the God of Israel. And then lastly, before we ended the series, we saw it with Saul and David. Well, at least we were seeing it. Saul, king over Israel, because of his defiance, because of his disobedience, like God is going to humiliate him. And he's going to take this little shepherd boy named David, right? And he's just going to elevate him. And he's elevated quickly, right? He went from a shepherd to a musician in Saul's house. And then God took him, and he was not only a musician, he became an armor bearer. Then he became the national hero over Israel as he takes down their strong man Goliath, right? And then he becomes like their 5-star general. And where we ended was like now, because of his like rapid elevation, like Saul hates him. King Saul is jealous of David. And so he's kind of like a fugitive now. He is on the run. And so this is where we're going to pick up. We're picking up in chapter 27. And now remember, as now David is a fugitive, he's on the run, and Saul is trying to, always hunting him down, trying to kill him like he's a wild animal. And David repeatedly has these, like he's put in like scenarios where if he wants to, in his own wisdom, like if he wanted to, he could actually take Saul's life. But Andrew, in this last message, talked about how David will not sin to win. He will not do things on his own power and his own might, right? He's going to trust God's timing and God's ways. That's where we kind of left off. And you saw this kind of real specifically in chapter 26, verse 10. Here is one of David's mighty warriors saying, Saul's right before us. He's sleeping. Let me kill him. He's just like, let me take him out. I'll strike him once. I won't strike him twice. Meaning he's like, I will do it quickly. I will do it efficiently. He won't squirm, right? And what does David say? Right, in 26:10 he says, and David said to him, as God lives, the Lord will strike him, or his day will come to die, or he'll go down into battle and perish, right? The Lord God forbid that I should put a hand against the Lord's anointed. God is the one who put Saul in power. I am not going to be the one who removes him. God will do it. But take the spear that is at his head and the jar of water and let us go. And so here's David reminding one of his mighty men saying, no, you're not going to kill him. God put him in charge. God will bring him, like he will remove him. If God placed him, God can remove him. But I want you to do something, right? Take his spear and take his water. And so what was that? It was a symbol, like you saying, take his protection, take his provision. And so they leave. And then if you remember, he kind of wakes Saul up from a distance, and he's like basically saying, I could have killed you, Saul. I could have taken you out. And like he humiliates Saul. And what does Saul say? At the end of chapter 26, he says, I have sinned. It's like, I am a fool. I am really, really dumb. In fact, in verse 25, he utters like these very remarkable words. I'm bringing this up because it's setting the scene from where we're at today. He looks at David and he says, blessed are you, David. You will do many things. You'll do many things, and you will succeed in them. And David went his way, and Saul returned to his place. And here's Saul now. He is king over Israel, and he's been trying to kill David. And now he's come to this recognition. It's like, I'm really foolish. God has blessed you. and you're going to do mighty things. It's like Saul knows, like, you will be king someday, David. And so that's where we're jumping in. Now, what would you think, without looking, that chapter 27 would begin with? In my mind, chapter 27 would begin with, and now God struck Saul. And David was given the crown of Saul, and the people leapt with joy, right? And there was great rejoicing as David took the throne. That's what you would think that would happen in chapter 27. And so let's pick up. What does chapter 7, verse 1 say? It says, then David said in his heart, stop right there, don't read any farther. And then David said to his heart, or David said in his heart, right? Here's where my encouragement, stop right there. Be very, very careful what you say in your heart. Be careful. Some people would call this reflection. David is reflecting. I think he is reflecting, but I think there's something else that's going on right here. I think David is hearing what we all hear. You know what that is? An inner voice. And sometimes that inner voice isn't just an inner voice, that voice is loud. And it's actually not just an inner voice, I think it's like an inner critic. And that's what you're seeing. David is saying something in his heart. And I would say this right off the bat, don't trust your heart. Don't trust it, right? Your heart is not worthy of being trusted, right? In other words, your heart is actually not a good barometer on what is right and on what is wise. It's not. I don't know if you're familiar with the old Roxette song. Some of you are like, Roxette? No, right? Some of you are like, Roxette, right? Remember I heard that Roxette song called Listen to Your Heart? Some of you are like, nope, like, listen to your heart, as it's calling for you. I'll stop right there, right? I'll stop. But that's what and to which I would say, don't listen to your heart. Do not listen to your heart. Why? Because Scripture, actually Jeremiah will say, your heart is deceitful and desperately sick. And so, David, he's listening to his heart. He has this inner critic that's going on, and it's doing something. It's actually causing like certain behaviors. It's like as he listens to his inner critic, his heart, what we're gonna see is that this is gonna produce a very pessimistic mindset. It actually produces like despair, discouragement. It puts them in the pits, is what I put on the screen. Because negative reasoning and thinking will often, at times, if we're not thinking correctly, right, will lead us into some very dark valleys. It can lead us to destruction. All right, so listen now, like look at verse 1 again, and I'll look what's going on in David's life and in David's heart, right, as he's reflecting. This is what he's saying. And David said in his heart, now I shall perish one day. Certainly I'm going to die by the hands of Saul. There is nothing better for me that I should escape to the land of the Philistines. Then Saul will be despairing, right? He'll despair, he'll grow discouraged, and he'll stop seeking me any longer within the borders of Israel. And I shall escape from his hands. It's almost like you see what he's doing as like he's reflecting in his own heart. He's like, I'm going to die. So this isn't the first time Saul has said, oh yeah, I'll stop pursuing. Like he always changes his mind and then continues to go after him. And I just all of a sudden it's like no matter how God has been faithful and how God has been protecting him, it's like he just reaches to a point and it's like, this is all fruitless. Right? Saul's gonna kill me. And there's a part of us, there's at least a part of me, and maybe some of you that's saying, you know what? It seems a little strange, right? Given all the victories that God has given David, right? If you just kind of read, again, like maybe some of you haven't read 1 Samuel, I'd encourage you, read 1 Samuel like this week and just look at all the victories that God gave him over and over. Like he's been delivered from Saul's hand multiple times. Like he was just delivered from killing Nabal. Like his name was going to be like defamed and stained, and yet Abigail like intervenes. And so God brings deliverance through Abigail. It's like over and over you see God's protection, you see God's provision. And yet now it's like all of a sudden, like as he comes off like this like spiritual high, because he's been shown over and over God's faithfulness and provision. It's like now he's like, he is in the valley of despair. It's like, surely I'm going to die. Surely Saul is going to kill me. And so in his mind and in his heart, he just begins to think of the future. And as he thinks of the future, he just surmises to himself like, hey, I'm a dead man. This is no good. I better take matters into my own hands. I'm going to do what's right in my own eyes. Now, before we see what that actually is, there's a part of me that says, do you ever like pause and maybe wonder, like, why is David doing this? Why is David acting? I mean, this, from what we have seen thus far, this is actually out of character. Because he has been so willing to trust in the might and the power of God, whether it was a shepherd and how God delivered from the paw of the bear and the paw of the lion, and how God delivered from Goliath, and how God delivered from Saul. Like over and over, you see like God's faithfulness, and yet he's so willing to trust God, even in the most scariest of all situations. And all of a sudden now he's like in this dark valley. Like part of me is like, why? Well, why is he acting out of character? And to me, it's not a hard reason to think, oh, this is why. Most likely this is why. You know what the answer is? Time. Time has got the best of David. Because what has God promised him? Like when he's probably 15 years old, the seer, the prophet, Samuel, has told him something. You're going to be king. You're going to be king over Israel. That's what he's told at a young teenage boy. And now, probably over a decade later, is he king? He's not. And so he's just thinking, I was promised this, but it hasn't come to fruition. I was promised this, but it certainly hasn't happened. It's probably not going to happen. And I think just time got the best of David. And if we're honest, time can get the best of you and me. When we're waiting and we're like, this is what we think God is calling us to, or this is the things that we expect, and that doesn't happen, we get quickly discouraged and despondent. And I think time just got the best of David. And his answer was found back in verse 2. What was his answer? Hey, I'm going to take matters into my own hands. I'm going to the land of the Philistines. Now, some of you are like, oh, that doesn't seem, I mean, yeah, he's fleeing to a place where Saul won't go to him. The land of the Philistines is enemy territory, right? He's going into the land where people hate the Israelites. That's painted a little bit more in modern day language. He is going, here's a Jewish person, he is going to dwell with Hamas. He's going to the land of Hamas. He's going to the land of Hezbollah, right? That's where he's like, that seems wise. That's what he's doing. And in my mind, he's like, he's no longer preaching the truths in his mind about what God has said to him. Because he knows that he can trust God. David knows that. Over and over, he just has to look back to say, how has God been faithful? In this situation, whether he's a shepherd, in this situation, whether he's a musician, in this situation, whether he's an armor bearer, or whether he's fighting a Goliath, or whatever it may be. He's no longer actually thinking and preaching himself the very truths of God. And not just that, right? He should know that he can trust God, but he should remember the promise that God gave him. Samuel gave it to him. The seer, he's not wrong. The prophet has never been wrong, as we saw from Scripture. And not just Samuel, like even Jonathan, Saul's son, says, you're going to be king. And even I will bend my knee to you. Abigail, right, said, you are going to be ruler over Israel. Even Saul says you're going to be king someday. So over and over, he's reminded of God's faithfulness. He knows he can trust the character of God, and yet he got to a place, a situation, and a time where he's just like, I'm just going to do what's right in my own eyes, right? I am going to take matters into my own hands. I'm going to the land of the Philistines, right? It caused me to think of that very proverb when are you familiar with Proverbs 14:12? The Proverbs are great. All right, in Proverbs 14:12, it says, there's a way that seems right to a man. All right, there's a way that seems so wise, so right, but in the end, it leads to death. It might look wise, it might look great, but it's going to be incredibly destructive. And that's what happens with David, right here. And so this is a very interesting little passage that we're going to look at, because really, like this whole series, we say rise and fall, right? Because spoiler alert, he becomes king. Right? At the very end of 1 Samuel, we're going to see he's going to be king over Israel. And all of 2 Samuel is going to see, like we're going to see this rapid ascension that David is king, and we're going to see what God does as he's king. It's like almost like everything he touches is blessed by God. But then we're going to see him make some other foolish mistakes, and we just see that fall of this great king. Right? It's going to be a great series, by the way. Great series. But what we see today is actually the fall before the rise. Even here, we're going to see how this mighty man falls before God is going to ascend him to be king. And so let's look. Let's just jump in now in verse 2 of chapter 27. I want you to see that David's sin and David's disobedience doesn't just impact him. It impacts others, right? It's going to impact his family. It's going to impact his friends. Verse 2. So David arose and went over, meaning he went over to the land of the Philistines. He and his 600 men who are with him, to the king, or to Achish, the king that's over Gath. And so I don't want to dwell here long, but I do want to kind of glean out. These are 4 areas or 4 things that you're going to see happen when we decide to take things or matters into our own hands, right? These are 4 things that we're going to see happen to David, and likely will happen to you and I. It's not exhaustive, but it's true. The first thing that we see when we take matters into our own hands, right? Our sin, our disobedience always impacts others. Always. We have this mindset that oftentimes, and maybe you probably have heard it before, maybe you've even said it, it's like, I'll do what I want to do. It's not going to hurt anybody else. Right? I'll make this kind of decision. It's only going to affect me. It doesn't affect you. Right? I promise you, none of our decisions are just like they happen in a vacuum. They don't. Right? Our sin, our disobedience can affect us, and they affect others as well. Our family, our friends. Right? A fool is a person who thinks that their decisions only impact them. I assure you that my sin and my disobedience doesn't just impact me. It can impact my wife, my kids. Can it impact a church family? Yep. Right? We're all just kind of like, it can impact a community and so much more. We really are just like one decision away from ruining so many things. A marriage, a family, a community. And so when you sin, like your sin actually affects more than just you. And I was trying to think, like, how can I explain that to someone like maybe who's single or who's not in a relationship? It's like, no, it really only affects me. It's like, no. Like, if you just think about it, like how many of you have been affected by other people's choices and decisions and actions, for good or for bad, right? Some of you are sitting there like you've been encouraged by someone's choices or decisions. Like you've been blessed by it. Like last night, we were eating dinner and we didn't even know it, and at the very end, it's like someone's already paid your bill. It's like, whoa, right? And it's like, what a blessing. Like that's such a great feeling, right? And you're like, hey, that's not fair. Right? But at the same time, like how many of you have like by someone's decisions, whether you know them or not, like the things that they do or said, like, man, it's like sets you off. Whether it's someone driving or at school, by what they say, right? It impacts us. It impacts us. So let's keep watching though. Verse 3 and 4, look at where the city where David is going to decide to like set up shop. Like where's his BRBO going to be? Where is he going to rent from? Right? In verse 3, and David lived with Achish at Gath. He and his men, every man with his household, and David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam and Abigail. So David decides, of all the places that he could live and dwell in the land of the Philistines, he chooses Gath. Gath, right? Well, what do you know about Gath? Right? It's already told us one thing that's really kind of jarring, but what else should you know about Gath? Who is the well-known person from Gath? Their champion, Goliath. Right? The very person that was their military hero, commander, like he goes to the city where he's from to dwell. And it's not just the city of Goliath. It tells us this is the very city where Achish, the king of Gath, is. Right? He chooses Gath to dwell. Why on earth would he go there? Like, what's his rationale? What's his reasoning? Verse 4 tells us. Here's why he goes to Gath. And when it was told to Saul that David had fled to Gath, Saul no longer sought him. Now, I don't know, when I'm reading this, I'm like, that's a dumb decision. Why would you go to Gath? Why would you go into the very hornet's nest to live? And it's not as though David doesn't know that Gath is where the king lives, and it's not as though this is where Goliath is from. David is not dumb. The reason that he goes there is he knows Saul eventually is going to find out where he's hiding. And if Saul knows where he's hiding, Saul has always pursued him. And so if he goes to some podunk town in the land of the Philistines, right, he's just like, Saul will pursue me there. But if I go into the hornet's nest, Saul's not going to seek me. He's not coming to Gath to take my life. He'll stay clear of that. And so does David solve his problem of the pursuit of Saul? You better believe he does. Now, does he open up a whole other set of problems? Yes, he does. He does. And so here's what we're going to see, is that not only does sin and disobedience impact others, is that sin and disobedience actually can give us a false sense of security. It can make us feel safer than what we really are. David thinks he's solved the problem. And in some sense, he has solved the problem, right? Saul is no longer going to pursue him. But he is going to get himself into even more of a mess. And so he right now has this idea, I'm safe. I'm secure. I have fixed the problem. And is that not true for how we often think? Our sin, our disobedience, we think that we have solved the problem, and if we've solved the problem, then we've actually we have found relief. We have this now sense of security, right? And so that's what we're seeing. And as he's reflecting, it's working. It's working so far. Sin has brought relief, but we're going to see, and here's my encouragement to you, sin and disobedience will never ever bring permanent peace. And it will not bring permanent safety. And it will not bring permanent security. Sin will always come to light. And it will always be judged too. And so, in verse 5, it leads to something else. And not just that it's a false sense of security, sin and obedience cause us to lie. Right? So he's going to lie to Achish, and he's going to lie to Achish more than just once. He's going to lie over and over again. Verse 5, then David said to Achish, if I have found favor in your eyes, let a place be given to me in one of the country towns, that I might dwell there. For why should your servants dwell in your royal city with you? Now, you might be reading this and be like, that doesn't sound like a lie, right? There are lies interlaced and it's not explicitly said, but if you kind of just tease out what David is saying, right, you clearly see he's not being genuine. He's not being truthful, in any way. In fact, what do you mean? Just start off the bat. If I have found favor in your eyes, is David trying to find favor in Achish's eyes? No. He's trying to do the things so he can have relief from Saul. If he's trying to find favor in Achish's eyes, it's only self-serving. And not only that, is he a servant of Achish? Is he wanting to serve the Philistine king? Not a chance. And so he is just lying, lie after lie after lie, right? He has no intention to find favor in his eyes, and he has no intention to serve this man. Will lying come back to bite him? Or to say it a little bit differently, a little more broadly, will lying come back to bite you? You lying right now? Right? Right? Are you lying? Maybe you're lying about what you did with your friends. Lying about what you did this last weekend, last month, last year. Have you lied about even just go out further, lie to your teachers? Have you lied to your boss about your work experience or your abilities? Have you lied to your spouse, to your kids, to your parents? Right? I'm just trying have you lied? Right? And as David lies, I mean, if you just think about, has his lies worked in the past? No, they always come to light. Sin will always eventually come to the light and come to the surface. You remember his last lie? It didn't go well for him. He lied to Ahimelech the priest, saying he was on a secret mission for Saul. He was just on the run. And guess what happened? Right? Ahimelech and his whole family were executed because they were found as, in Saul's eyes, as being treasonous or traitors. So him and 85 others were slaughtered because of David's lie. And so, it doesn't work. Well, actually it does. It does. For a season. It doesn't work permanently. And so I'd just say be careful. Be careful in thinking, well, it's worked, right? This is a good thing. No, be careful. And so, look what it does. It does work because in verse 6, what happens? And so that day, Achish gave David Ziklag. Therefore, Ziklag has become the king of Judah to this day. So, his lies actually get him a little country town. That little city is called Ziklag. It'd be like he was given Swisher, right? He was given Covington, right? Just a little town. Right, because this is, Ziklag is a little bit south of Gath, just like Swisher or Covington. And that's where he's like, sure, that's where you're going to reside. And the number of the days that David lived in the country of the Philistines was 1 year and 4 months. And so here, Achish, king of Gath, gives him a little suburb, little Ziklag, and David gets what he wants. As he takes matters in his own hands, I think he's like, jeez. Man, all is well, all right? All is well. Look how God is blessing my disobedience. Then we're going to see, right? This kind of continues. At the very end of verse 6, it says he dwelled in the land of the Philistines for 1 year and 4 months, 16 months. Sin and disobedience actually now doesn't just go from, where impacts others, and sin and disobedience will cause us to lie, but sin and disobedience actually leads to compromise. He's just compromising over and over again. Right? His lies, he's going to have to lie more and more. Why? If I lie more and more, I'm going to seal off the problems. And that's what you're going to see. And so, in verse 8, look what he does in Ziklag. And so, before we see it, 16 months, he's going to live in disobedience, sin and disobedience for basically almost 1.5 years. Before God is going to rise him up to be a throne, that God's going to have to do some character work in this man. But for 16 months, he is living in sin and disobedience, meaning it's really fascinating, in these 16 months, you know what you don't see? Any Psalms that he has written. Right? Remember in the first series, I talked about this is where he wrote, throughout 1 Samuel, this is where he wrote probably Psalm 23, and this is where he wrote Psalm 52. Right? He is not writing any Psalms during these 16 months that we know of. You know why? Because sin has shut him up. He has nothing to say. So let's look what happens in Ziklag. as he's compromising. Right now, David and his men went up, made raids. Right? So they raid against the Gershurites, the Girzites, the Amalekites. And these were the inhabitants of the land of old. Verse 9, and David would strike the land and would leave neither man nor woman alive, but would take away their sheep, the oxen, the donkeys, the camels, the garments, and then go back to Achish. So isn't this interesting? It's like he's given this suburb south of where really Achish is. So he's given us, and then he makes raids. And what he's doing, he actually is taking out the enemies of God. And yet he's going back to now Achish and communicating something different. Right? It's almost like there's a part of us that's like, it looks like he's like an undercover agent. But in actuality, what is he doing? I think he's just living a double life. He's still fighting the enemies of God, but he's still compromising over and over and over again. Right? It's almost like living one way at church, but then living a whole nother way at school. Living one way, or talking like being like presenting yourself one way in your small group, but then presenting yourself another way at work. Right? He's living a double life. Because in verse 10, what does he tell Achish? Oh, that he's raiding the Girzites and the Jeshuites and the Amalekites? No, what does he tell him? No, I'm raiding or going against the Negev at Judah. Meaning, what is he telling him? I'm fighting the Israelites. I'm plundering them. Right? You know what that's called? A lie. Right? He's just compounding his lies upon lies. Right? And I wonder, like during this time, as he goes home, as he's sleeping that night, I wonder if he's just thinking, when is the hammer going to fall? When is my sin going to be found out? Because what I'm saying is not genuine and is not true. When am I going to be actually shown to be the imposter that I really am, the liar that I am? And in verse 12, Achish trusted David, thinking he has made himself a stench to his own people. Therefore, he shall always be my servant. He's like, man, this guy, this is awesome. Here we have Israel's hero now fighting his own people, because that's what David's telling him. Here we have like this guy he's a stench. He is an odor to his own people. He will now certainly be my servant and my bodyguard. And so all is well. All is well, right? David hasn't been found out. He has his own little suburb. He is raiding the enemies of God, and yet he is telling the king of Gath, right? Yep, I'm actually raiding these people. All is well until it isn't. In chapter 28, verse 1, look what happens. A day comes, and in those days the Philistines now gather up their forces for war, and they're going to fight against Israel. And Achish said to David, understand that you and your men are going to go out with me in the army. Right? And so what we've seen throughout 1 Samuel is that oftentimes Israel and the Philistines are going to go at war together. And yet again, they're going to go to war. And Achish is like, all right, you're coming with me. You're going to fight with me. What's the problem? Do you see the problem? Right? The problem is glaring, right? One, Achish thinks that David's an ally, because everything that David has communicated, like his character has been so compromised, Achish is saying, you're with me and you're not with your people. And not just that, right? What would happen now if David goes out to war with Achish and he goes and fights the Israelites? What's going to happen? Will Israel then have David as their king if he's going to fight against them? Not a chance. There is no way that the promise of God is actually going to be fulfilled if he's going to fight his own people. And so he is put in a pickle, in a hard spot, a tight spot right here. And so how is he going to respond? Is he going to respond with boldness and say there's no chance? Right, verse 2. And David said to Achish, very well, you shall know what your servant can do. And Achish said to David, very well, I will make you my bodyguard for life. Unbelievable. David says, I'm with you. I'm with you. So, it's almost like you read this and you're like, has he punted his kingship? Is he no longer going to trust the promises of God? Right? In so many ways, in actuality, it's like there are times where we get put in places like, I think I'm going to trust my own wisdom and my own ways more than God's ways. Because it seems to work. And yet, here we are. David says, I'm with you. Now, I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to wrap her up. Did David solve his problem by going to the land of the Philistines? He did. Saul is no longer pursuing him. Right? He has been rescued. He is no longer being pursued by Saul. But he has created a host of other issues and problems. And I just look at this text and I want to just say to myself and I say to you, is Saul David's biggest enemy? It's not. All right? David's biggest enemy is not Saul. And David's biggest enemy is not Achish, the king of Gath. David's biggest enemy is not Doeg, the Edomite. David's biggest enemy is not Nabal, right? David's biggest enemy is not Abner, right? Who is David's biggest enemy? David, right? That's his biggest enemy, right? David's biggest enemy is actually his own sin and disobedience. That's what is like glaring from the text, right? Ultimately, who is God going to have to bring deliverance from for David? It's not Saul, and it's not Achish. Will God do it? He will. But ultimately, David is going to have to be rescued from David. Just as Abraham had to be rescued from Abraham, and Isaac had to be rescued from Isaac, and Jacob had to be rescued from Jacob, and Moses had to be rescued from Moses, and guess what? Jay had to have been rescued from Jay. And you had to be rescued from you. Our biggest problem is actually not outside of myself, and it's not outside of me. My biggest problem is actually inside of me. It's my own sin. And that's your biggest problem too. You think, oh, my problem is this and it's this. It's not as though it's not a problem, but your biggest problem oftentimes is you. And God, in his grace and his mercy, loves to deliver us from ourselves. In fact, that's the beauty of the gospel, is that Jesus came not to be an example. He is a good example. Jesus came to actually deliver us from sin and death. He came to deliver me for what I can't do for myself. I can't forgive my own sins, and I can't change myself. But Jesus can. And so if you're here today and you've never trusted Jesus, right, the Son of God, he came for a purpose. He came to rescue us from sin, and he came to lead us actually into newness of life, to give us a perfection we can't earn or deserve, but then to actually guide us because he actually knows what's best for us. Doesn't mean things are going to be easy, but he knows what's right and he knows what's good. Right? The gospel is great, great news. And so don't ever think that I've gotten myself in such a place where God would not rescue me from me. He will at any time and in any place. There's where he does his best work, is deliverance. The beauty of the gospel. Right? Call upon me in the day of trouble, I will deliver you. And you will glorify me. I'll get the praise, you get the deliverance. And so, is God going to intervene in this situation with David? You better believe. How is he going to intervene? You got to come back next week. It's fascinating. So I'm going to pray. Father in heaven, what a great truth that we have. Is this historically true? Yes. Does it have relevance for today? Yes. What a beautiful reminder that our biggest enemy, right, is not outside of us. That our biggest enemy is actually sin and disobedience inside of us. this proclivity to want to take matters into our own hands and to do things our way, me first, my way, and it does not bode well. It leads to death and destruction. And so, oh, that we would continue to look to you, to trust you, to know that you are good, to know that you are faithful, to know that you are God who loves to bring life and forgiveness and hope. And so give us that, your people, I pray. Remind us of the truths and the promises you've given us. And all God's people said, amen.